to sum some of these things up, what are the hidden costs to society not discussed when the claim is made that food in America is cheap?
Oh, wow. Yeah, how long do we? No. So, I mean, it's not cheap in just about every sense we can think of. You know, when we think about the water bill that we've been talking about, if we think about the environmental harm and pollution that goes into the air and the water and the soil, and all the ways that we have to clean that up, if we think about factory farming and the intense water and air pollution created by that, the labor abuse that I talked about earlier today is also phenomenally high and is system-wide in our food system, and creates huge costs in terms of workers who are either disabled or can't work as much or need various forms of public assistance that we all give them, food stamps to healthcare, for instance. So those are just a few, I'm sure, and the long-distance transit of food as well. I mean, all these things have immense costs to all of us.
Climate impacts, obviously, agriculture being one of the biggest causes of climate change. But I think one of the other sort of, let's say, not obvious factor is our attitude towards food. We think of food as fuel. You know, just get something to stick in our stomachs, you know. So we've lost our appreciation for the sacred act of growing something and being able to consume it, and you're becoming part of that plant and the soil and the air and the water. You know, that sacred cycle, understanding of the feeling that it evokes is gone in most people. And that's a sad loss.
We have demanded cheap food in this country, so we're all to blame too for the cheap food. We want cheap food. We don't like to see prices go up, and the government has worked assiduously to keep prices down. There are caps on a number of different commodities. They have price supports for other commodities. They have subsidies for a very large number of crops. And some of those are well-intentioned and well-placed. There's disaster assistance to farmers. If they lose their crop because of a disaster, they can get farm insurance and be covered. But what we really want is to keep a control on the cost of food, and to do that, we have approved a large number of governmental programs that force food to be grown in a certain way, and in so doing keeps the price down, but it forces agriculture to go in a particular direction in order to do that. The other thing is that in order to keep prices down, the producers of food, particularly of processed food, will buy cheaper and cheaper and cheaper ingredients. And so what used to be, we might consider a very healthy food choice, may not be such a healthy food choice now because of this insistence on keeping food prices down. Again, we don't see a lot of this, but it's right there in front of us. And so as long as we don't have an open discussion about that, it's probably going to get worse, because we like cheap food, but by wanting cheap food and insisting on it, we are causing inertia in changing the system, and we're increasing momentum in the direction it's going. And we have to come to grips with that. Food, good food, quality food, it's not cheap. In this country, and I don't know if you two know the numbers, but the proportion of our income that is spent on food, do you know the numbers on that? In most countries, it's considerable. In this country, it's almost nothing.
Yeah, I think between US and Canada, we're competing for who's the least amount of money is spent of our income on food. It's really peanuts, and it's actually much less than it was 100 years ago.
Right, yeah, Europe spends far more than we do on their food. The one other thing, oops, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I just think that you know what, I lost my train of thought. I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay.
Happens, right?
Given the growing number of herbicide and insecticide-resistant species that farmers must contend with, one could reasonably ask, why do farmers continue to use chemicals?
Well, I think our food and farm economy forces farmers to use chemicals. I mean, there's tons of cases of farmers who want to get out of the chemical trap that they're in, and they'll tell people that. And the signals are not there. I mean, sure, organics, may pay better, but where are they going to sell the organics? Are there local markets? Are there good distribution chains? If Walmart is now the biggest, not producer, but seller of organics, that's not a good sign for organic farmers either, to have a good market to sell to. So the markets for organics, even though the market as a whole is booming, the actual individual markets for organic farmers are not huge, and the incentives are not there to the extent that they need to be. Meanwhile, the larger policy mechanisms, the whole farm and food economy are sending the message to continue what we've been doing, which includes relying on petrochemicals for food production. So, as I spoke about earlier, the food corporations, whether it's McDonald's or Coca-Cola actually demanding so much corn for their sodas, or any other fast food operation or supermarket chain, they demand this just like this crop, that crop, the other crop. They only want specific things that they've demanded, and they control the food production system. They control the supply chains of how it's grown and what the farmers are going to get. And they're sending, other than their good cases like the antibiotics case, where at least there's some improvement and some progress, but the larger message in terms of chemical-based agriculture is just not there. So we might move to antibiotic-free chicken at McDonald's, but it's still mass-produced, labor-exploiting, using grain feed that was grown with pesticides. So the larger system is completely, fundamentally reliant on that and furthering that.
I think it's important to remember that there's a difference between being a commodity farmer and being a food producer. There are about 2 million, just over 2 million farmers in the country. Most of them have faces, but a lot of them don't. About 5% of the farming industry is corporate farming. And they don't really have faces. Real farmers, that is people farming, that group, that gigantic group of almost 2 million that make up only 23% of our food, by the way, they don't want to destroy the soil. They don't want to use chemicals. It's costing them huge amounts of money. Most of them do not make enough money from farming to support their family. Very few farmers do. The farmers that do have gone commercial. They had to if they were going to make enough money to actually stay in the business. The really big farming interests are the ones who are using the disproportionate amount of chemicals. And they're growing commodity crops. They're growing vast acreages of monoculture corn and soy and wheat and cotton and canola and a few others. So we do have to distinguish between who these entities are. Are they people, or are they people as defined by the Supreme Court? Because there is a big, big difference. And the difference in how they run their lives and how they want to run their lives are very different as well. The traditional farmer would very much like to get out of the chemical business, very much so. The farmer that has a board of directors and stakeholders is not interested in that particular aspect of farming.
So what happens if the small farmer wants to get out of chemicals and just go organic? Why doesn't that work? Like, why doesn't he do it?
It has a lot to do with the supply chain, as Chris alluded, but.
Yeah, I've interviewed quite a few farmers who've made the switch, and some who wanted to make the switch but couldn't do it. There's a lot of things they have to do differently. If you're going to get off the chemical trap, you have to sort of detoxify your soil to begin with, because the soil is usually so depleted there's hardly any microorganisms left alive. And so you need those in order to produce organically. A lot of farmers have debt. You know, they still owe the chemical bill from last year. It takes 3 to 5 years minimum to get from that chemical form of farming to an organic form. They're not going to make the same amount of money in those years. Can they survive financially? Do they have the support in terms of what if this problem comes up? That's, you know, normally they would sort it out with a chemical, but now they can't or don't want to. So they have to have a whole set of resources and training to be able to make the transition. There's, you know, the odds are really stacked against it, and farmers do it. It's not easy, but only those who can really, you know, marshal the support and have the commitment to make it work succeed.
Yeah, one other quick thing I would add is that there's no subsidy for organics. There's no support system for them, or sort of life raft, or, you know, rescue operation for them if things go wrong. And, you know, so part of the answer is, in terms of policy, not just federal, but even on local and state levels, is to develop subsidy support systems for organics. The other thing is, you know, most people doing that transition are going to be on the small or medium scale farmers, not the giant ones doing, because, you know, they have more of a need to. The giant ones might be doing okay. So I think that that's where we need to put some of those support mechanisms to allow those transitions, and there are some programs that are starting to do that.